Good evening, everyone. Late Night Mega here, and tonight we're playing 5-color control in Modern. Yes, this is serious. Sort of. So, this deck is kind of built around this card, this land, Pillar of the Parons. I thought we'd start with the mana base since, well, I could show you all the cool multicolored spells and stuff, but you'd be wondering, how are we casting all this stuff? And so I came across this card. Actually, I played during the original Ravnica block, so I did know of this card. And after going through some searches for deck ideas and such, I was reminded of this card. I saw it again, and like, I should see if I could make a 5-color control deck with this. I mean, there was a 5-color control deck in Standard less than a decade or so ago with Reflecting Pools and Vivid Lands. And so I was wondering, can I use like Reflecting Pool, Pillar of the Parons to make a 5-color control deck for Modern? And this deck was quite an interesting adventure to design, and it's tons of fun to play. So basically here we have, between the pillars and the reflecting pools, we have 8 lands that come into play tapped, can make all 5 colors of mana, and don't cost us any life. And that's kind of important because, well, the rest of the deck, as you can see, we have fetch lands and shock lands, and I'll be getting to those in a moment. So, Pillar of the Parons, one other thing I want to say that was a huge deck building challenge here is this card can only use, the mana from it can only be used for multicolored spells. You can't use them for monocolored spells. So I did look back at the past standard lists. You know, they were running the Reflecting Pools and the Vivid Lands and Cryptic Commands, and so I was trying to get Cryptic Command in the main deck, and how I built the mana base was I had all the blue fetches and I had all the blue shocks, and basically the deck came down to okay, if I play a Pillar of the Parons within the first 4 turns, I'm not casting Cryptic Command on turn 4, and that felt really bad when the rest of the mana base was geared towards getting to that Cryptic mana. And the second issue is, since the rest of the deck was geared towards getting the Cryptic mana, playing any of the other multicolored spells we had was a huge hassle and often didn't happen on time because we were working our way towards the Cryptic Command. And it became easier when we dropped a pillar, but it was still really rough, and so it wasn't consistent at all. So I ended up, putting this deck list aside, and for a few months. And at the time, I only had 3 Pillar of the Parons because my local game store only had 3. I bought them out, saying that I was one day going to build a 5-color control with the deck. I had one guy, he's like, no, there's no way that's ever going to happen. And then sometime later when I was playing the deck, he saw the deck in action, he was amazed. So kind of put on hold, then finally, I don't know what happened, someone traded one in or something, and because I couldn't find anyone with these things. And so I bought it up right away, and I went back to brewing with this deck. Now the rest of this deck, the shock lands and the fetch lands, here's kind of what I went with. I went with Flooded Strands and a couple Polluted Deltas because those are the lands I have. You can use whatever fetches and shocks you'd like, but I followed these 2 rules. Number 1, the fetch lands need to be able to fetch for any color of mana, any of the 5 colors through, the shock lands. And number 2, I think there's only like 1 shock land that Flooded Strand can't fetch for, and only like 2 that Polluted Delta can't fetch for. So they can still fetch for all colors, can't fetch for each shock land, but they can fetch for most of the shock lands. I believe there's like 6 or 7 or maybe 8 shock lands in here, 7 or 8. And then we have 3 basics, 1 forest, 1 island, and 1 plains, which is down here. And I'm also running a couple of the Vivid Lands, a Vivid Creek and a Vivid Grove, because blue and green seem to be some of the more prominent colors of this deck. All 5 of them get used pretty healthily. But, you know, I've seen arguments against these Vivid Lands, people saying, oh, you can't use the Vivid Lands in Modern because they come into play tapped. And I don't quite get that, because these same people are running manlands like Raging Ravine and Celestial Colonnade, Creeping Tar Pit, Shambling Vents, you name it. And those all come into play tapped all of the time, you know? So why would it be a crime to run a couple Vivid Lands uh, when people are running manlands that come into play tapped? I don't quite understand that. I do understand that, you know, these don't turn into creatures, they aren't win conditions or finishers on their own right. But still, to say you can't use it because it comes into play tapped, I find that a little bit of a silly argument. Having a few tapped lands in Modern, I found is okay, because, well, we've done that with other control decks. We've done that with manlands. So let's go up and let's take a look at this smorgasbord of multicolor control spells. We have Path to Exile, one of the few monocolored cards rather in this deck. It is such a great removal, kind of hard to beat even with all this multicolor goodness. We have Abrupt Decays, we have everything you want. We have Glittering Wish. I told you guys this card would be back. This card lets us grab a multicolored card that we own for tournament purposes. It's a card that we own in our sideboard, and we get to put it into our hand. And so this gives us access to our sideboard in Game 1, which is very, very powerful, especially in this deck when we're running all 5 colors. So if there's an effect that you don't see in the main deck, it's probably in the sideboard, and we'll get to that in a bit too. Izzet Charm. It's been useful in all of my blue-red control decks, so putting it here kind of for the same purposes. It can kill small creatures, it can counter non-creature spells, so it adds to our counter and our creature kill count at the same time. And we can also use it to filter away cards that we don't need in the late game while we're looking for something that we do need. We've got Lightning Helix to reestablish some life. Remand. Remand is excellent in this deck. You know, counter something. A lot of times with this list, it's not a matter of not being able to have an answer for a particular card, but more like we just need time to make our land drops, assemble our colors, and find the cards that we need to answer whatever our opponent is trying to cast. So Remand gives us all of that. It gives us the time, it gets us deeper, drawing an extra card, helping out with land drops, all of that. Counterflux. This was the slot that used to be Cryptic Command. And so when I switched it to Counterflux, actually I did try Render Silent, but I like Counterflux better just because it can't be countered, and you can overload it and wreck a Storm player. So yeah, this is also the deck of things that can't be countered. We have more things that can't be countered in the sideboard. We have Esper Charms. This lets us draw cards at instant speed, make our opponent discard cards, and it's also enchantment removal. There is so much stuff in here that interacts with artifacts and enchantments in the main board. It's kind of ridiculous. And we have Kolaghan's Command. And one of Sphinx's Revelation, because who doesn't like just dumping a bunch of mana into a spell and drawing a bunch of cards and gaining some life. And we also have Snapcaster Mage and Siege Rhino. So yes, this deck is running Siege Rhino, Kolaghan's Command, and Snapcaster Mage. Yes, that combination is as ridiculous as it sounds, and yes, I have done that to people. It was very amusing. Well, amusing for me. My opponents just kind of sat there and shook their head in disbelief. But I enjoyed it nonetheless. So Siege Rhino, this slot here, I wanted more than just Lightning Helix to help pad our life total in the main deck, and I was also looking for something obviously multicolor so it works with the pillars, and something that can kind of act as a finisher on its own and regain us some health. And so Siege Rhino just kind of fit everything I was looking for there, so there you go. And with the synergy of with Kolaghan's Command, of course. Snapcaster Mage, because who doesn't want to snap back all of this goodness? So we can deal with artifacts in the main deck. We can deal with enchantments with Esper Charm. You know, a lot of people look at this and they're like, "Oh, this deck instantly keels over to Blood Moon." Maybe a turn 1 or 2 Blood Moon, turn 2 if our opponent is on the play. But we have a ton of answers for a Blood Moon. You know, if we have 2 mana up, we can float the mana, let the Blood Moon resolve and Abrupt Decay it. We can Izzet Charm to counter it. We can Remand to counter it until we find something else. We can Counterflux to just hard counter it. Guaranteed countering it, by the way. Or we can float the mana for Esper Charm, let it resolve, and then destroy it that way. So, and that's a good portion of the deck. And also, if we know our opponent is running Blood Moon. If we know they're running Blood Moon, we can also wish for another answer, because of course we have answers in our sideboard. So that's kind of the main deck. Let's take a look at the sideboard for stuff we can wish for. Kind of like our Bant Splash Red anti-burn control. We also ran Glittering Wish there. We had Keranos and Dragonlord Dromoka in the side. So I just found that was a great combination of finishers for whatever occasion or deck we need them against. And so why not put them in here? Other things we have in the sideboard, we have Mass Graveyard Exile with Rakdos Charm and also Jun Charm. Rakdos Charm costs 2 mana, and it has a couple relevant alternate functions, destroying an artifact. Probably the most relevant nowadays. Jun Charm, once again, we're looking for versatility with this deck. So we can also exile graveyards with this, or it can also be a mini sweeper. We also have Supreme Verdicts, which is, well, our mass removal, and that can't be countered either. We have Slaughter Games. Our opponent's playing combo, let's just wish for a Slaughter Games in game 1 and wreck their combo. We have Crackling Doom, because you guys know I love having sacrifice effects in my sideboard. This gives us access to them in game 1. And we have Detention Sphere. This is kind of like the catch-all sort of answer. Now this could easily be, and in fact is probably supposed to be, a Maelstrom Pulse. But I've had a few people ask, you know, why am I running Detention Sphere and not something that's an instant like Anguished Unmaking or Utter End? And here's my rationale behind that. If we're using our Glittering Wish to wish for an answer, we're already doing the wishing at sorcery speed. So whatever we're wishing for, it doesn't really matter if it's an instant or a sorcery at that point, especially if there's a permanent on the battlefield that we need to take care of, and we have 5 mana and a wish to deal with it. So you could get the Utter End, but I find myself a lot wishing for an answer from my sideboard that costs 3 mana. There's a lot of times where I'm saying at 5 mana, and so the difference between 5 and 6 mana is kind of huge in this case. So yeah, stick with Maelstrom Pulse if you have it, or Detention Sphere if you don't. Jun Charm, Crumble to Dust. We need a way to deal with Tron. This is one thing we can't wish for, and kind of sad that we don't have too many good ways to deal with Tron, even with all this multicolor goodness we have. We also have Fracturing Gust returning, and we know that's good against Affinity, Boggles, yeah, anything running tons of artifacts or enchantments. And we can wish for that in game 1. And that's also hilarious against the appropriate decks. We also have Sarkhan Unbroken, so this was kind of an alternate finisher sort of spot. And what I was looking for here was something that wasn't necessarily a creature in itself. Planeswalker would have been nice, so Sarkhan kind of fits the bill there. And I was looking for something that can generate card advantage or draw us cards. Sarkhan's +1 does that. It can also put on some decent pressure in its own right, which is what his -2 does, making 4/4 red dragons. The -8 we're not really concerned about. I have had a couple people mistake this as a sort of dragon control deck when the only real dragon things are Dromoka and Sarkin and Broken. Yeah, you're not ever supposed to use his -8. I'm perfectly content just using his +1 and -2 to generate card advantage all day long. So, how in the world does this deck play out? And are we still taking too much pain from our mana base? So, very complicated questions. So typically how this starts, you notice we only have one card in this deck that is 1 mana. And so our turn 1 can either be like a fetch land or putting in a shock land tapped, something of that nature, or a vivid land tapped. Turn 2 is probably the most likely time that you're going to shock yourself. And you know, shocking yourself once per game, not the end of the world. You'll probably end up doing it twice by the end at least. Depends on what deck you're playing against, how comfortable you are making that play, and what you need to cast off of that. But turn 2 is oftentimes a fetch land. Most of these cards, you notice, are instant speed, so this can play kind of like an instant speed draw-go sort of deck in the early games. You know, fetch and put in the shock land tapped if you don't need to cast anything immediately. If you do, then, well, shocking yourself is probably going to be worth it. And then we have a decent number of 3 mana cards, but don't feel super pressured to play these right away. Unless, you know, if you're up against Affinity and you have Kolaghan's Command, you might want to play that right away. But otherwise, you know, you can just hang on to all these multicolored cards and just cast them as you need them. And that's typically what this deck does. So once again, you're going to want to try and mitigate some of the pain from the mana base. And I feel that if you kind of play like I just described, you should do okay with this. Also, there are so many charm and command effects in this deck that you know, you get this feeling that you can just do whatever you want. It's 5-color control. That's kind of the motto of this deck. And so you want to destroy artifacts or enchantments, we can do that. You want to counter stuff, we can do that. You want to draw cards, make your opponent discard, we can do that too. You want to play Keranos or Dragon Lord Dromoka as finishers, yeah, sure, go for it. And you can throw in your own other multicolored finishers. Sigarda wouldn't be terrible in here either, and I'm sure there's some other ones. But yeah, there's just so many charm effects and command effects and wishes that I find this deck really difficult to pilot. And I find myself making a lot of small mistakes, and it's not always just, you know, you look at the mana base and you're like, okay, well, you got to try and match up your lands that you're fetching for with the cards you want to cast. That's part of the battle, and also planning out, you know, which shock land off of a Flooded Strand is really going to be the best one for you for the next couple turns. And given what's in your hand and what you might try and cast, and then you spend a bunch of time deciding, then you end up top decking a Pillar of the Parans, and it just makes your life easier. But there's also this whole Glittering Wish thing, you know. When do we cast Glittering Wish? What do we wish for when we cast it? And how does sideboarding work when we have Glittering Wish? I suppose I should talk about that. So, what I found for sideboarding is this is why I run Supreme Verdict. So, decks where I want Supreme Verdict, I will side in 2 Supreme Verdicts and leave one of them in the sideboard just because I have 4 Glittering Wish. So I essentially have 6 cards that can that either are Supreme Verdict or can become a Supreme Verdict in my main deck. And I found that combination to work quite well. So with the Glittering Wish, what I'll do is I'll take like the number 1 and number 2 wish targets, and I'll leave those in the sideboard, and then I'll take anything else that I might want in this matchup, or this whatever particular matchup I'm in, and sideboard those into the deck. And I've found that to work well. You know, maybe there's another way to do this. I don't know. It's 5 color control. Do whatever you want. And so sometimes, you know, you've got all these charm effects, all this wishing going on, and, you know, sometimes you play a Path to Exile when you should have played an Abrupt Decay because you didn't know what your opponent's next card was going to be, and you'd rather have the Path for that or something because Abrupt Decay doesn't hit Tasigur or whatever. But so there you will end up making a lot of little mistakes. Like I've caught myself making at least half a dozen or more tiny mistakes in a single game with this deck just because I'm so overwhelmed with the amount of decisions that you have and the amount of options that you have available at any given time. However, just the sheer power and versatility of these multicolored cards can oftentimes just pull you through all those little mistakes and just still win the game regardless. So the deck has that going for it. In terms of power level, I would say this is one of the more powerful control decks that I have. In fact, I would almost consider it one of the trifecta of my best decks. I guess it'd be a quadfecta, if that's even a word. Uh, However, there's a few things that just hold this deck down, and they really hold this deck down. First thing is Ghost Quarter would be my #1 nemesis. You know, when my opponent is sitting there and they don't really know what's going on with this deck, and or how to play against it, because who sits down at an FNM thinking they're gonna play against 5 color control? I mean, get real. But I'm just looking at my opponent's Ghost Quarter over there, and I'm just hoping he doesn't use it on me, because a single Ghost Quarter can take this deck from making 5 colors into making 2 to 3 colors like that. And sometimes the deck can recover from that. I mean, there are 26 lands, um, and you've got remands, you've got card draw and such. But sometimes it cannot, and it can be really scary seeing a Ghost Quarter there, especially in the early turns. Tectonic Edge, not quite as bad because you do get up to 4 lands before they get a chance to use it. So yeah, Ghost Quarter, and also just how mentally taxing this is. I don't think I can stress this enough with all of the different decisions that we have to make on this. You know, what's the best way to deal with this threat that we're presented? Should we Abrupt Decay it, or Lightning Helix it, or is it Charm it, or save the Charm for some non-creature spell that our opponent might cast? You know, just so many decisions. When do I play Esper Charm? Do I use it to draw or discard? When do I play Glittering Wish? What do I even want to wish for here? You know, it's very confusing, but you know, the deck is also very fun to pilot. You know, just seeing the look on your opponent's face as you go from Abrupt Decay into Esper Charm, into Siege Rhino, into Kolaghan's Command, into Glittering Wish for Crackling Doom or whatever. It's just silly. It's ridiculous. Um, so other things this deck does, this is the deck of things that can't be countered. You've got the spot removal that can't be countered, the counter spell that can't be countered, the mass removal that can't be countered, the finisher that can't be countered with Dragonlord Dromoka, and the Slaughter Games combo hate that can't be countered. So yeah, lots of stuff that can't be countered. But I do feel like I go to a 4 or 5 round FNM with this deck, and I leave very mentally exhausted from piloting this thing. Again, with all the decisions between the mana base and the fetching, and the balancing the colors, and you know which of these cards to play when all of these things will deal with whatever's right in front of you, but what do you need later, sort of thing. And yeah, so for that reason alone, I wouldn't recommend this for any sort of a bigger type of tournament. I wouldn't take it to anything that's going to be more than 4 or 5 rounds, because it's just very mentally draining on you. But the deck is fun to play. It's a blast to play. I mean, you get to use all 5 colors in a control deck in Modern. What could be more fun? Uh, and the third thing, I kind of hinted at this a little bit earlier, Crumble to Dust, as in, or not Crumble to Dust, but Tron as a big weakness to the deck. So much to the point where I'm even running Crumble to Dust, which kind of conflicts with the Pillar of the Parans, but this deck needed something to deal with Tron. Ideally, what I'd like to see printed is some sort of multicolored crumble to dust effect. Maybe make it maybe make it cost 3 mana, and you might be saying, well, how can you do that? That'd be so powerful. Well, make it cost red, green, and blue, kind of a unusual and somewhat rare color combination, and give it the same text here as crumble to dust, and suddenly this deck would be golden. So, yeah, Tron is kind of another problem. If you play a pillar within your first 4 lands, you're not casting Crumble to Dust on turn 4. I did have a Realm Raiser in here before. You could throw that in. But yeah, just kind of play whatever you want with this deck. You can mix up the removal a bit, mix up some of the finishers. We could try out other things. I did have Realm Raiser in here. Realm Raiser is quite interesting with Glittering Wish. Let me go ahead and bring that up. And if I can spell. I can't spell. But anyways, Realm Raiser, it's a 6-mana, 4/2 creature. It exiles all lands when it enters the battlefield, and when it leaves the battlefield, all the lands return. So, there's been times where, I'm playing against some random deck that I don't think I'm ever going to use Realm Raiser against, and then I find myself, okay, my opponent's tapped out or whatever, and I blew up the last of his cards with, whatever I had out here, Abrupt Decay, whatever, all the stuff destroys things. And I untap, I draw, I get a Glittering Wish, and I have 8 mana, and I'm like, well, what can I do with this? Well, let's wish for Realm Raiser, exile all the lands. Your opponent has nothing on the field that can deal with the 4/2, and just beat him down with that. So I've had that happen before. Yeah, this deck is crazy to play. It's crazy to see in action from a viewer's standpoint or an opponent's standpoint. And just tons of fun, tons of silliness. It's off the wall. It's 5-color control. Do whatever you want, So that is it. This is what I would consider probably one of the craziest ideas you're going to see on this channel. Just a really interesting combination of cards. I always tell people the type of stuff that I'm casting. When I did have the Ashiok, one time I went turn 2 Glittering Wish, turn 3 Ashiok, turn 4 Siege Rhino, and my friends that mostly played Standard and did play against Siege Rhino and Ashiok when they were in Standard, it's like, that's just so gross, and it was pretty gross. But I enjoy the deck. It really is a blast. Don't let me saying that you're going to make a bunch of mistakes and it's mentally taxing. Do give this deck a try. It is fun above all else. So that is it. That's 5-color control. Next time, what deck is next? Next I've got, well, I think the next deck on my list is a deck that, well, we've done blue-white control and we've done Grixis and stuff, so I was trying out some other control color combinations that I haven't before, one of them being blue-black. Blue-black is probably my favorite colors for control from a design standpoint. You've got the bounce, discard, counter spells, card draw. What could go wrong? So that is what we'll do next time.